Hi guys, I'm Linda. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ and I struggle with codependency. I wanted to come on and just greet you and let you know some of an update of what we're doing for Wednesday nights. So we've had 3 weeks as of tonight of not meeting together, and I've been doing these videos instead of our normal meeting. Starting next week, even though everything's been extended a month, after talking to my pastor and to our district representative for Celebrate Recovery, I made the decision that we're going to go ahead and have a modified version of Celebrate Recovery on Wednesday nights. What we're going to do is just going to have a short get together with all of us together, just have some worship and maybe a little devotional or teaching together, just real short. And then we're going to break into our small groups because I really believe that, especially right now, our small group time is so vitally important. And I know we really need to have this time together. So starting next week, we'll meet at 6:45. We're not going to have snacks and fellowship. I don't want to take any chances of anything being contaminated by anybody. So if you want to bring your own, that's fine. We're not sharing. If you don't feel well, I'm requesting that you please stay home. But during this time, it's really super important for us to stay in contact with our sponsors and accountability partners. Whether or not we can get to a meeting, it does that part isn't as important as sticking together with our accountability partners and our sponsor. We have to stay in touch with them. But again, meeting together is so vitally important, and I did not want to wait any longer to get back together. So starting Wednesday at 6:45, we will resume a modified version of Celebrate Recovery, and we'll meet in the coffee shop. So if you're going in like the main sanctuary, there's double doors to your left before you enter the sanctuary, and that's where we're going to be meeting. So hopefully I'll see you there this coming Wednesday at 6:45. And we're not going to have I want to stay with the recommendations of our state. So we're not going to have more than 10 people in the room. If we do get more than 10, we'll immediately split for our men's and women's groups. And then I'll have other leaders there as well. In the event we have even more than 20. So I have a plan in place. We're going to stay safe. We're going to follow all the guidelines of the state and of Celebrate Recovery. So I just wanted you to know that's what we're doing. So hopefully you can come and join us, 2800 West Walnut Avenue, every Wednesday night at 6:45. So I hope I get to see you guys next week. But in the meantime, I'm going to do this last video, and I'm going to give a very short version of my testimony. I cannot, for the life of me, I can't give a whole testimony, my whole life story in a short time. So we're not going to say how long I've been alive, but I've lived a lot in my age. So I'm going to start and just introduce myself again. Hi, I'm Linda. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ, and I struggle with codependency. So I was born and raised to two amazing Christian parents. I also had a foster brother and a sister, both older than me. My parents were very firm believers in Christ, and they were both extremely heavily involved in ministry. And they also had their own business that they owned, and that kept especially my dad very, very busy. So on the outside, we looked like a perfect family. But there's problems in my family the outsider could not see. And really, as I grew up, my faith really was what I was told, not what I experienced or what I searched out for myself. And that really created an issue for later on, and help me make some of my choices later on in life. When I was 5, I was sexually abused by a neighborhood boy, and that really affected me later on. Although I did block out the memory until I was an adult. But I remember laying in bed as a child, and I would have such anger and frustration come over me. I'd start pulling out my sheets, and it felt like I had so much in me that I could pull them apart. And I knew that wasn't normal, but I didn't know why I felt that way. So while I was still young, my sister really started to display some emotional issues, and she struggled with depression and had other emotional and psychological issues. She really took a lot of her anger out on me, and I did not understand what was going on. She was mostly verbally abusive. There was some physical abuse as well, but mostly she would tell me things like I was fat, ugly, had a big nose, and I couldn't sing. Um, I was told this a lot, and it really had a deep impact on me. And I grew up feeling worthless, and I didn't understand why. Um, when I was little, though, I felt like through all of this, I thought it was my job to keep the peace in the family. Um, I thought if I just did things to please my sister, it would make her happy and it would make our situation changed, would make it change. But what I discovered later on, and I look back, that's really where my codependency started. Um, as I entered my teen years, I really felt there was this emptiness and a longing that I could not identify. And my self esteem was so low. I was really easily swayed by peer pressure. I really wanted to do the right thing, but I wanted to be accepted. And I couldn't seem to do what I knew was right. Kind of like what Paul talks about in Romans 7:18 and 19, where he says, I know that nothing good lives in me, that is in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. So I gave up my virginity at 16 and I started to experiment with drugs and alcohol. I sought out the attention from men and bars to try to fill that emptiness and that void that was inside me. By the time I was 17, I was a raging codependent. I really had trouble making decisions for myself. I really had an emptiness that I was searching to try to fill with anything that I could get my hands on. Um, I felt like I had no voice by the time I was 17. I really knew something needed to change in my life, but I had no idea what that was or how to even change it. When I was 18, I was dating a man. He was an older man, and he claimed he loved me. And then I found out I was pregnant, so we got married. Uh, it was kind of a crazy thing. I only knew him a whole 3 months when I married him, and I do not recommend that. But I really thought that I found something that I could fill that emptiness with. What I did is I ended up marrying someone who was an addict, alcoholic, and eventually a womanizer and abuser. Um, it only took about 2 years of the marriage for things to really start falling apart. Um, and put that with a blaring codependent, that's really a disaster waiting to happen. Um, so my son was born May of 87, and I saw even at that point that there were some problems. But I was really an expert even by then to pretend the problem didn't exist. I could see that there was a problem, but then I could talk my way out of it and just kind of stick it under the rug and not deal with it. Um, I did try to go back to church and I tried to have a relationship with God, but I didn't even really understand what that looked like. The years that followed in my marriage really got more difficult as time went by. And I really chose, like always, to close my eyes to the problem and not even take responsibility for my own actions and choices of enabling and my codependency. So I was married to this man for almost 18 years. And during that time, we moved a lot. There was a lot of abuse. Um, but really, I thought I was trying to be a good wife. And even though I thought that's what I was doing, I was doing a lot of enabling to the point where even I would go out and buy his alcohol. Um, and it really was not a healthy situation for me to be in, for either one of us, really. In 95, I had an unexpected surprise. I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. And really, this was the start of a change for me. It really got my attention because at that point, I really had no idea what I even believed. I was so spiritually confused. I did know there was a God, and I knew I needed to do something. So I started to pray to the God that I knew and asked him to show me what the truth was. And it's funny when we ask God to do something, he does it. And he started to show me little by little his truth. And it was amazing to me how much I discovered about God during this time. So in Jeremiah 29:13, it says, if you look for me wholeheartedly, you will find me. So after my daughter was born, my husband wanted to go back to school. So we moved from California to Oklahoma, and he went to school there for 18 months. Really not much changed with our marriage, but I was discovering this new relationship with the Lord, and it was growing and flourishing during this time. And I was seeing a difference in me. I was changing. I was getting involved in a church, and I was actively involved. And like I said, I was changing. I was growing in this amazing relationship with Christ. Um, my commitment to Christ was growing by leaps and bounds. And that void that I had, that I searched for so long and from so many things that I had in my life, I was beginning to find what would fill the only thing that could fill that emptiness and that void, and that was Jesus Christ. And it was absolutely an amazing time for me. But here's the thing. Even though I had this growing relationship with Christ, I still chose to wear a mask to church. No one really knew who I was, and for sure, no one knew what was going on at home. So after my husband finished school, we moved to Northwest Arkansas, where he got a job. And I found a church there, and it was a wonderful church, and I developed some really good friendships there. And I got really involved, and it was a wonderful place for me to be. But shortly after we moved there, my husband was in a severe motorcycle accident, and he was in the hospital for almost 2 months. This really made a spiral down. Like I said, he was already drinking and using, and you know, being abusive and having affairs and whatnot. But this really spiraled down our relationship and everything else. Because when he got home, he picked up right where he was, and on top of everything, he was trying to mask pain with the drugs and alcohol. So really, there was a lot going on. He got more violent, and I was really afraid of him. But here's the thing. I didn't do anything to stop it. I still stayed. I enabled him. I still was a codependent, and I was terrified of conflict. I didn't know how to deal with it. In June of 2002, I really had my eyes opened, and things were going on that, it just really got my attention. So my daughter, she was, I think, 6 at the time, and she was sitting on the floor in front of me. She was playing. And my husband at the time, he was in a rage, yelling and cussing and screaming, throwing things, and he was just in a rage. But my daughter, I looked down, and she was sitting there on the floor playing and humming like she was in her own world. There was nothing else in her world going on around her. I could actually almost see the wall that she built up for herself. And I knew that this was wrong. And I knew I needed help. I knew I needed to do something. So I found a Codependence Anonymous program in my area, and I started to attend. I started to learn about codependency and how to change me and my behavior and take responsibility for my actions. And then in 2003, I heard about a Celebrate Recovery program that was starting in our area. And I started to attend the 12-step meetings there, and the step study. And I started to go to the regular, it was a Friday night program that we went to for Celebrate Recovery. I got actively involved. I got trained to be in the leadership, and I was in the band. And I even got to lead a step study. It was a wonderful time of growth for me. It was amazing. My relationship with the Lord exploded. And that's just it. I learned about how to have a relationship to Celebrate Recovery. It wasn't just a religion. And I always knew to a certain extent it was a relationship, but I didn't really understand how to go about having that relationship. And I discovered through Celebrate Recovery how to have that amazing relationship with Christ. And it grew by leaps and bounds. But I also learned about how to set boundaries, and not just set boundaries, but follow through with the consequences, which is exactly what I did. And it was amazing because I was starting to really just thrive. I was coming alive, and my self-esteem started to increase, and I was really starting to feel so much better about myself. Something else that was going on is my relationship with my family started to improve with my children and my parents. It was just amazing. And my relationship with God, I felt so cherished and loved by him. It was just amazing. Like I said, he's the only thing that could fill that void that I had for so long. And it was an amazing feeling to finally get that hole inside of me filled up with a loving God. So about a year later, I really came to the understanding that my husband at the time was not going to remain faithful. He just could not stay away from the drugs or alcohol, and he was still being abusive. So I spoke with my pastor, my sponsor, my accountability partners, my parents, and the Celebrate Recovery leadership, and I prayed a lot, and I felt the release to divorce him. And it was a really hard decision to make, but I really felt that release. And during my divorce and after my divorce, I really worked on me and my recovery. And during that time is when I really discovered I would never be done with recovery. It was going to be something lifelong for me, specifically for me, because I was growing so much. I knew this is something I needed for me. Um, so after the divorce and everything, and unfortunately not too much longer after that, I was in worship, doing practice and things for worship. And there's a gentleman on our worship team, and he and I started to become really good friends. And then the friendship kind of deepened, and we started seeing each other. Well, we started talking about marriage, and that kind of scared me, but I talked to people about it and I prayed, and I felt like this was something God wanted me to do. But here's the thing. I was looking for something totally opposite of what my last husband was. And this gentleman was, he had been a pastor at one point. He was in ministry. And in my mind, he was a total polar opposite of what my first husband was. And I was taking anything for confirmation. And really, it was more of a rebound, and it was not of God. I really don't believe it was something God was leading me to do, but at the time I really believed God was directing me to do this. So on October 30th of 2004, we were married. And I continued to work on my recovery, and things were really nice at first. It was really good. And God continued to grow me and my relationships, and I kept growing in Him and getting healthier. Then an opportunity came in California, and about a year later, and we moved and came out to California. And in November 2nd of 2005, we came to California and found a church in March that God directed us to. And that's where we called our home. And we knew that we were going to start a Celebrate Recovery program before we even came out, because I researched the area and there wasn't any that I could find. So we talked to the leadership and we were able to start a Celebrate Recovery program there. And on March 13th, 2006, we had our very first Celebrate Recovery meeting. And it was amazing. It was wonderful. Lives were being changed. But here's the thing. Through my leadership and what God was teaching me through leadership, I grew into a whole different person. God was leading me into a whole new phase of life. And I think the biggest change out of everyone through that program was in me. It was just amazing what God was doing. The sad thing is, about 2 years after this, my daughter came to me and told me that my husband at the time had been sexually inappropriate with her. I was floored. I was floored. My world fell apart, and I couldn't understand how something like this could happen. I confronted him immediately, and he said he admitted it, but he said he would never do it again. He begged me to stay with him. My daughter didn't want me to leave, and I was honestly afraid of what would happen if I turned him in. I was afraid of the effect of the community. I was afraid of just so many different things. And here's the thing. Fear is what was taking control over me. Not me being led by God, not me seeking wise counsel. It was fear. So I made the decision to stay with him, and I talked to my daughter about it. And I told her that I wanted her to come and tell me if anything ever happened again, and that I would be asking her regularly, if anything was happening. And and my husband was telling me nothing would ever happen again. When you really want to believe something, we can convince ourselves of many things, and that's a form of denial. And I was in denial, and that was probably a decision I will regret for the rest of my life. I've had to live with this decision since then, and it's been a very difficult thing to live with. My daughter did agree to this, but she was a child. It wasn't her decision to make. It was my decision, and I should have turned him into the police, and I did not. I really thought that was all behind us. Things seemed really good after that. I did check in with her regularly, but life seemed to be good after a while, and everything seemed normal again. And she even came to me and asked him to adopt her, which he did. And by the way, I found out later he made her do that. So I really thought all of what had happened was in the past and nothing more was going on. And that just was, again, a form of denial. So in March of 2011, my husband and I were commissioned as recovery pastors at our church. And during this time, I started to notice, shortly after that, I started to notice some things weren't right in my marriage. And I just couldn't put my finger on it, but things definitely weren't right. But everyone seemed to think I had a wonderful marriage. Everyone loved this man. He was very charismatic. Most everyone loved him. He was heavily involved in the community, and it was just, he was a wonderful man according to everybody. So I thought it was me. I came to the conclusion that I just wasn't being a good enough wife, and I wasn't doing my part. Again, denial. I was an expert at it, remember? So starting in November of 2011, I really felt God leading me to start learning how to do things around the house, like, how to repair sprinkler systems, and, how to take care of the fruit trees that are on our property. We owned about an acre of land in the country at that time. I wasn't sure why God wanted me to do it, but I did it anyway. And something else God was doing was he was calling me sometimes in the middle of the night or early morning and telling me to come spend time with him. My relationship with the Lord during that time was amazing, and it grew so incredibly strong. And he was preparing me for what was to come. May 7th, 2012 is going to forever be burned on my mind. My husband was arrested for sexually abusing my daughter, and apparently it had been going on for a very long time. Again, my world came crashing down around me. I knew my life had ended the way I knew my life had ended. And I remembered how my daughter had told me how he was inappropriate with her. And I had such feelings of guilt, and I felt so responsible for what had happened. When I got home, though, from the police department, my recovery kicked in. I called my sponsor, my accountability partners. I called my pastor, and and these people were coming over to my house. And while I was waiting for them to come, I was just in prayer. And I remember thinking, I can't stay here. I have to leave. Everyone in town knows me. I can't be here anymore. I have to leave. But God told me, he gave me what I call my marching orders. He told me that I was to be an example. I was to walk as a godly woman walking through a fire, and being that example of what a godly woman is. He said he'd give me the strength to do this. He said I was to look people in the eye and smile at them. I was thinking that was crazy to do that under these circumstances. But I knew that that's what he was calling me to do. And he gave me the strength to do that. And he told me he would give me the strength to do that. He always supplied for my needs during this time. He was absolutely amazing. And everything I went through, I never went hungry. I was able to stay where I was living for a season. It was amazing how God took care of everything. And over the next 2 years, about 2 years of my life, a lot of things changed. A lot of times the days felt overwhelming, but God was always there giving me what I needed, emotionally, physically, spiritually, in every way, shape, and form. He was there for me, providing for me. And I was even given the opportunity to take some special classes to learn more about how all of this abuse could happen and how to understand it, and learning about, how I was impacted by it, and, all of these things. And it was really an amazing time, because I also went through therapy and learned why I was making these wrong choices in men, and how to make healthier choices. And I learned how to make decisions that were right for me. So between recovery and therapy and these classes, I grew a tremendous amount. you know. And I knew I still had to live with my choices, and that was something that I really, really struggled with. But I am so blessed. My daughter has forgiven me, and we have an amazing relationship today. I'm super blessed. She's one of my very best friends, and I love her dearly. Um, and God really showed me these patterns of unhealthy relationships and how to fix them, and how to fix me, how to work on me, so I could learn and see how things were affecting me, and how to set boundaries again, and stay in those, keep my boundaries in place. I was also learning how to forgive myself, which was very difficult to do. And I still haven't completely successfully done it. I still have some days where I really struggle, but I'm still working on it. I have really come a long ways, and I'm understanding more and more how I can forgive myself. And that doesn't excuse my behavior, but I have to forgive myself. It's important for me to do, and I've come so far on that. Um, and like I said, I'm actively working on that. But I'm also painfully aware how easy it is to fall in denial. And I need to stay actively open, eyes open, wide open, and keeping an eye out for that denial, to be prayerful about it, to make sure I stay out of denial. I never want to go back in denial again. I want to live a life out of denial and fully facing what's in front of me. Um, I've seen great healing in my heart. I've seen God doing a tremendous work in me and my family. My daughter has overcome so much. Today she's super successful, college full time, working full time. She's in a relationship that, that in itself is huge. So I'm super blessed. My to be able to come out of something like that for my daughter is huge, and for me to be able to come overcome the things I've overcome is absolutely amazing. So on May 2nd, 2013, my ex was sentenced to 25 years in prison, and on the day of his sentencing, I was blessed to be able to say in court, in front of him and in front of the judge, that I forgave him. Now, that didn't mean that excused his behavior, but that meant he no longer had any control over me. That the poison that comes with unforgiveness could no longer affect me. And that's an amazing thing. And the freedom to have from being able to forgive him is absolutely amazing. So, moving on. Eventually, God did put another godly man in my life, or put a godly man in my life, not another one, because I believe this is the first true godly man I've had. And I was really resistant at first, but God made it so abundantly clear that this was his plan for me in my life. Okay, guys, relationships are hard work, but they can be so rewarding when they are centered around Christ and we're willing to work at them. In August of 2014, it really became clear to me that God was calling me away from the church I was in at the time, and he had been for quite some time. I just hadn't seen it, and I think part of me really didn't want to see it because that was my church family. But he called me away and brought me to the church I'm currently in now, which is absolutely wonderful. I love my church family. And then in January 17th of 2017, I was blessed to marry my soulmate. Okay, life is not perfect. Okay, if anyone tries to tell you that life is perfect once you become a Christian, no. I'm here to tell you, just because you're a believer, just because you're in recovery, does not mean life is perfect. We will still have challenges on a regular basis. The difference is, when we're believers, we have a peace and a joy that can accompany us no matter what we go through, no matter what circumstances we find ourselves in. And the current situation we find ourselves in this world, we do not have to live in fear. We do not have to live in wondering what's going to happen. God provides for us. Always, always, always will provide for our needs. Like I talked about last week, we don't have to be afraid. We don't have to worry. He's always there for us, and he'll continue to do that. Like with me, God provided And that was the difference. It is the difference. And in being a believer and in being in recovery, we can have hard times in our life, but we know whose we are. We are the child of the King. We are a child of God. We don't have to worry. We don't have to be afraid. He will be there for us, and he gives us joy and peace during those hard times. And it's just amazing what God can do in our lives when we allow him to. And that's just it. We really do have to allow him to come into our lives. And no matter what we're going through, God will be there for us. It's amazing to me how God restores things to us. In September of 2018, God blessed me by giving me another opportunity to lead a recovery program. And September of 2019, I was able to transition that recovery program into a Celebrate Recovery. I'm so blessed and thankful for what God is doing in my life. It is just, I'm spoiled. I really am spoiled. So I want to share real quick before I close the life verse that God's given me. It's Isaiah 61, 1-3. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. I feel that this is what God and Recovery has and is doing for me. It's what he wants to do for you. I was brokenhearted and I'm being healed. I was a captive and I'm finding freedom. I have gladness instead of mourning and praise instead of despair. I know I still have so much more to learn about myself, and I still have a long way to go in my recovery. I will always be working in my recovery, and I will continue to work the steps. I want to continue to grow. I want to become closer to God. Most of all, I want to become the woman God intended for me to be all along. Thank you for letting me share. And you guys, I cannot wait to see you next week. You have an amazing and wonderful evening. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.